All right, so one of the most important and yet overlooked aspects of these 2022 midterm election results has been the ballot measures. And this is something that I am aggressively in support of for a number of different reasons. I think that when you look at the results that we're about to get into here, you'll recognize that even in many conservative states, the broader public, the American people overall, are on pretty much every single major controversial issue. They are to the left of, in many cases, both political parties that we have right now. And so having the ability every single time that you go to vote, whether it's in the midterms or a presidential election, to be able to directly vote on some of the top key issues within your various county or within your various state is something that is mostly going to produce good results. So I want to go through some of these that we had during these midterm elections. So here from NBC News, just to start us off, we're going to go with abortion and healthcare first. So some of these are very, surprising. Some of these are not surprising at all, but we're just going to go issue by issue here. So they start off with abortion. They say California, Proposition 1, a right to an abortion. They said yes, overwhelmingly. It was 65 to 35% here with 53% of the vote in, but they've already called it. So this is something that is going to be enacted in California. That's absolutely dope. They say Kentucky, Amendment 2, remove the right to an abortion. So we've seen this come up in a number of different states. We saw that one in Kansas, which a lot of people were surprised by, where they affirmed the right to an abortion in their state constitution. Now we have Kentucky, another very conservative state who, if you were to believe the narrative surrounding the issue of abortion, you would think that they would disproportionately or even overwhelmingly vote to get rid of the right to an abortion within their state constitution. And yet, you look at this issue, and even in a state like Kentucky, the no vote has decisively won here. Again, it was a little bit closer in this state. It's 52% to roughly 48%, but still, the no vote won out on that. So I guess that they are not going to be removing their right to an abortion. So that's great as well. Michigan, again, right to an abortion, overwhelmingly passes. Montana, okay, another very conservative state. They say referendum 131, require care for infants born alive. So this is something, we'll just read through the details here of what they're explaining exactly what this ballot measure was about. They say establishes that infants born alive at any stage of development are legal persons and require medical care to be provided to any infant born alive after an attempted abortion, induced labor, or any other method. This referendum also institutes criminal penalties for any healthcare provider who does not comply, and that, as you can see there, obviously lost in the vote totals. So I mean, again, you're talking about a state like Montana and something where you would think with a semi-controversial issue like this that they would overwhelmingly vote to codify this in their state constitution, and yet the more left-wing, or I guess the more liberal position on this ended up winning out. We move on to Oregon here. Measure 111. This was one of the best ones that I've seen across the board that managed to get success, at least in terms of how we have the vote totals right now. So they say universal access to healthcare adds language to the Oregon Constitution stating that every resident has a fundamental right to affordable healthcare, and that is currently sitting, we're at 88% of the expected vote in, and that's currently sitting at roughly like 51% to 49%. So I guess that we could count more votes and this could end up flipping the other way, but as of right now, this is looking pretty promising. And I'm sure there's a lot of caveats to this in terms of how they are actually going to implement this. I guess you could do something like a statewide Medicare for all, where you're having everybody under the same banner of single health insurance programs. So you could go with it that route. But again, I'm not going to hold my my hopes up in this type of a situation, because even when you use the language of supporting universal access to healthcare in this country, I mean, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, they're all people who have come out and said that in theory they support a universal access to or access to universal healthcare. But it's like, if there's still that cost barrier, then it's just not going to end up being truly universal, right? So you have to actually approach that from the single payer type of system way, whether it's at the federal level or whether it's in whatever various state that you want to talk about. So yet to be seen exactly how they would actually implement this, but again, an absolutely amazing ballot measure that is on track to pass. They say Vermont as well, overwhelmingly, I mean, not even fucking close in this one, passing an amendment to a right to reproductive autonomy. So again, you love to see it. That was just on the abortions. Now we go to elections and voting. So I mean, a lot of these were honestly pretty surprising given the current state of like where the Republican Party is at right now, with a significant plurality or a majority of Republicans believing that like the 2020 election was stolen and that it was rigged and that there's this rampant voter fraud, which is really non-existent. But all of those sentiments that are brewing around the country right now now, and yet you look at a lot of these ballot measures, and again, they trended towards the left-wing decision in this. So Arizona, Proposition 309, increase voter ID requirements, and that, I mean, it's a razor-thin margin here, 51% to 49%, but that's looking like they're going to say no to that. And we move on here to Connecticut. Amendment, in-person voting, so expanding access to voting in Connecticut. Not really surprising because it is Connecticut, but that also managed to pass. Michigan, expand voting access, changes voting policies in Michigan, including requiring 9 days of early voting, authorizing absentee ballot drop boxes, and allowing voters without photo ID to sign an affidavit verifying their identity. That, again, overwhelmingly passes with a 20% margin there. Nevada, this is an absolutely amazing one as well. This is one of the best ones up there with this universal access to healthcare. So in Nevada, a ballot measure is currently on track to pass. Again, only 84% reporting right now, so it could go the other way. But as of right now, it is looking like it is going to pass, and this is for top 5 primaries and ranked choice voting. They say that it establishes open top 5 primaries and ranked choice voting for all congressional, gubernatorial, state official, and state legislative elections. So this is something where, hopefully this could be like a trickle-down effect where Nevada does this and then other states start following suit, because ranked choice voting is just infinitely superior in terms of actually ending up with candidates who have much broader support among the actual voting base and among the constituencies, right? Because you don't have to just pick in a simple binary. You can actually rank your choices and say, I like this candidate best, and then I have my number 2, my number 3, my number 4, my number 5, and then if your top candidate doesn't end up in the final round of voting, then they count your number 2 pick. If they didn't make it, they count your number 3 pick. It's just a much better way to go about voting than just having a simple Republican, Democrat on the ticket, and you have to pick between the lesser of 2 evils, right? So that's absolutely amazing, and hopefully this does end up actually passing, because again, we're still waiting on a lot of votes for that. Ohio, this is one where I guess the left sort of took a little bit of an L, but not the most catastrophic thing. It's to limit voting for non-citizens. So it says it adds language to the Ohio Constitution to require that only U.S. citizens who have been registered to vote for at least 30 days can participate in any state or local elections, and prohibits local governments from allowing a person to vote in state or local elections if they did not meet these requirements. So again, whatever, it's Ohio, not that surprising, honestly, but that's just on the elections and voting systems. Now on firearms, just a couple here from Iowa. So they say a right to bear arms. They are enshrining that in their constitution, I guess, as if the Second Amendment is somehow under threat right now at the national level, but that overwhelmingly passed. And then in Oregon, this one was kind of surprising. They say increase gun ownership requirements, changes the procedure to purchase a firearm, including requiring a permit, background check, and safety training for anyone who wants to purchase a firearm. Absolutely amazing. This measure also prohibits the manufacture or sale of ammunition magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. So again, absolutely great initiative here, just getting initial steps in gun reform and just basic common sense gun legislation. So that looks like it's also going to pass. Again, it's a pretty tight margin here, and it's only 90% of the expected vote in, but it's looking like that is going to pass. And we typically think of a state like Oregon as being very left-wing because you have some of these very liberal cities within the state, but Oregon is a disproportionately relative to its relative to the understanding of how people think about this state. I would definitely anticipate that it is up there with some of the highest gun ownerships in the United States, because there's a lot of people who live out in rural places in Oregon. There's a lot of conservatives and right-wing people in Oregon, a lot of militias in Oregon, and so to have something that is increasing gun ownership requirements and regulations surrounding that actually successfully passing is pretty surprising. Now we get to some of the best ones here. So on marijuana, this was a very mixed bag, okay? So usually when it comes to conservative states voting on marijuana legislation, from what I've seen, at least over the last couple of years, they usually do end up passing, but this one was pretty much a coin flip depending on which state that we're looking at here. So they say marijuana, Arkansas, issue 4, legalize marijuana. That decisively, they voted it down. So that fucking sucks to the people of Arkansas on that front. Maryland, they voted to legalize marijuana. So again, it's Maryland, not that surprising, but congrats to people who live in Maryland. If you are watching my channel right now, go smoke a blunt in honor of this successfully passing. So congratulations, guys. Missouri as well. So this is another one where it's kind of a surprise. A very conservative state here. Legalize marijuana. They voted overwhelmingly to legalize it. And then we have North and South Dakota, which I'm going to be honest, I apologize if there's anybody who watches my channel who lives in one of these states. I basically think of them as holding a population of 12 people, and so it's not that surprising that this didn't end up passing, but still, I mean, somewhat close margins given how solidly conservative states both of these are. But I mean, again, look at the populations voting on this. I mean, you had 350,000 here, 228,000 votes in this one. Almost all of the votes are actually counted by this point, so it doesn't look like they're going to be successful. But I mean, even combined, North and South Dakota had like what, 1/4 of the total votes that were in this Missouri ballot initiative to legalize marijuana. So again, not that surprising, but at least we chipped away a little bit and got a couple more states there, including a couple conservative ones that are going to be legalizing marijuana, making it that much less difficult for us to do that at the federal level moving forward. Minimum wage, we had this one from Nevada, increase the minimum wage to $12 per hour by next July 1st. That overwhelmingly passed in the state of Nevada, so that's great. Couple here on sports betting. California decided to legalize sports betting, and I guess they also decided to legalize online sports betting. So have at it, go have fun with that. I guess I'm not really strongly positioned one way or another on sports betting. I guess not really something that I do personally, but I guess have fun with that. We have a couple more that I have lined up here, which I think were also great. So Nebraska voters have approved a ballot measure to raise the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2026. So I mean, I look at this and it's a state like Nebraska. This is probably the best that you're going to be able to get. Obviously, $15 an hour by 2026, you're still going to be lagging behind in terms of a livable wage and, actually providing people with a stable economic groundwork to be able to live comfortable lives if they're working full time. So it's not the best, but still, it's Nebraska. So $15 an hour by 2026, there you got that. This was another great one coming out of Colorado. They successfully passed a ballot initiative for universal free lunch, I guess, in some of their schools that they have there, which this is kind of one where I look at and it's like, okay, that's absolutely great that it passed. It looks like it was by a pretty significant margin, but at the same time, I mean, you're telling me that 44% of people living in the state of Colorado, okay, almost 1 million people who voted for this ballot measure decided like, no, I actually think that like some school children should just starve if they can't afford to pay for lunch, right? I mean, we're talking about fucking kids here, right? We're not talking about like, somebody who can't afford to go get McDonald's on their lunch break or something. We're talking about like actual children who have no control whatsoever over whether or not they are going to be able to afford to get school lunches. And you still have like 1 million people in this state that are saying that that's an okay situation. So, I mean, I guess, congratulations for actually getting this done, but Jesus Christ, 44% of the people in Colorado voting against something as simple as that. We have another one here on the drug front. So this was amazing as well. In Colorado, voters approve psychedelic legalization ballot initiative. So I'm going to have to do a little bit more research in terms of like how they're actually going to roll this out. It'll be interesting to see how they do it. I mean, they use the phrasing here, legalization, which means not just decriminalization, but you'll actually be able to like maybe go to a store or I don't know, get a prescription from a doctor and be able to use psychedelics within the state of Colorado. So that's, again, absolutely fantastic. Love to see it. This should be something that we are doing across the entire country. We got another one here, Arizona. Arizona voted resoundingly, now it's 73%, for a ballot measure forcing the disclosure of big donors to dark money groups spending in political races. It's one of the most lopsided margins in the entire state, eclipsed only by one state legislature and 2 judicial races. So again, absolutely amazing, trying to chip away at the ability for a lot of these dark money super PACs and a lot of these billionaire and millionaire and corporate funded PACs to infiltrate their way into our politics. Obviously, this isn't solving that problem at a ground level, right? It's not banning the influence of them, but at least giving people the ability to have some semblance of transparency on that, to be able to know who is actually behind the funding of a lot of these PACs. So that's a good initial step. Obviously, again, we should just be overturning Citizens United. Corporations, billionaires shouldn't be able to spend any money whatsoever in these races. They should just be publicly funded. But congrats to Arizona for overwhelmingly, or resoundingly in the words of Isaac here, managing to get that one done. So not that surprising, honestly, because having a dark money influence, whether you're Republican, Independent, or Democrat, that is something that pretty much everybody across the board hates. So it's not that surprising, but it's good that they at least got to vote on it. This was one where I kind of just had to step back and be like, this is good, but like, holy shit, America. I mean, this is really where we're at right now, because I mean, most of the states, all right, I'm using that word specifically here, most of the states who had a ballot measure that was related to whether or not to continue doing slavery in prisons and their prison industrial complex, right? slavery rejected ballot initiatives. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some of the states here and see which ones were on the right side of this very, very basic and obvious issue. So states that eliminated slavery related language. They say Alabama voted on a constitutional amendment that will eliminate racist language from the state constitution and delete an exemption that allows for involuntary servitude for certain crimes. So this is something where I'm sure most of you guys know the historical context of this. I think it's either the 13th or the 14th Amendment, where basically when we outlawed slavery, just like straight up slavery, in the United States, we essentially put like a little caveat in there, a little, excuse in there to say that, well, we're banning slavery outright, but if you commit a crime and you're arrested and you're thrown in prison, then we can justify doing slavery. And this is something that happens across the entire country. I mean, we have people within U.S. prisons, and keep in mind, we have 25% of the world's prison population, only 5% of the world's total population, so we have an absolutely massive mass incarceration state right now across this country, and thousands, if not millions, of these prisoners are basically forced to do labor on behalf, and keep in mind, because a lot of these prisons are private, a lot of them have, for-profit companies that are contracting with them, they're basically just doing forced labor for the profits of corporations. Okay, so it's just a completely ridiculous situation. It is straight up slavery. There's no real difference between this and just like plantation slavery. I mean, I guess you could say it's arguably slightly less brutal, but I mean, just the fundamental reality of what this actually is at a ground level, it's just straight up slavery. And so the idea that this is something that we're even still having to vote on is completely fucking insane, but at least I guess some of these states managed to be on the right side of this issue. So move on here to Tennessee, where voters considered a constitutional amendment to remove slavery as punishment for a crime and replace it with a sentence: slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited. Okay, so that's great. Vermont voters voted on a proposal to remove language that allows for slavery and involuntary solitude, while also saying that slavery and indentured servitude in any form are prohibited. Oregon voters approved a measure to remove slavery as punishment for a crime and add language that allows an Oregon court or probation and parole agency to order an alternative for those incarcerated for their sentencing. So again, a couple of good outcomes there, but then we get to Louisiana, because of course, Louisiana. All right, so they say Louisiana rejected a proposal to change a line in the Constitution that critics have argued still permits slavery and involuntary servitude. Louisiana's Constitution has a sentence that reads: slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited except in the latter case as a punishment for a crime. They say the amendment would have changed that line to say slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited, but this does not apply to the otherwise lawful administration of criminal justice. So it seems like the language that they were using in this was kind of weaselly anyways. So, I mean, I guess slavery still legal in the state of Louisiana. So, okay, that's where we're at right now as a country. But now we get to a little bit of good news, because I wanted to finish this video on a somewhat positive note here. But this was another one that was absolutely up there with the Oregon and their universal health care and some of these marijuana legalizations, and the Nevada approving Nevada voters approving the ballot initiative on ranked choice voting. So in Illinois, they say they're poised to have a big win for labor tonight. Amendment 1 would be the first time voters codify a collective bargaining via ballot measure, and Illinois would also become the first state with a constitutional ban on right to work. Okay, and so it looks like, based on the results, which I guess these are still preliminary results, so we're going to have to follow up on what the actual outcome is here, but it's looking pretty solidly in favor of essentially enshrining the constitutional right within the state of Illinois to collective bargaining, and also banning it as a right to work state in their constitution. So that is going to be incredibly difficult for right-wing, corporate-backed politicians within this state to reverse this. And this is absolutely fucking amazing. I mean, essentially, if you don't know, right to work states, first of all, I mean, there's a phrase that goes along with this because it's true. Right to work states just basically mean right to work for less states, because every state that is a right to work state, their workers have, on average, worse benefits, worse wages, worse working conditions, etc. They lose out on a bunch of money because essentially, if you're a right-to-work state, what it means is that workers who work in some place that has a union or is trying to form a union, they don't have to be a part of that union. They don't have to pay union dues while still collecting all of the benefits that collective bargaining, that union representation has fought and gotten for them. So it's basically just a pure corporate-backed idea that is essentially just trying to undercut labor rights and the ability for unions to have power, to be able to have the funding to hire teams of lawyers, and to be able to have the resources to be able to go and collectively bargain and fight for better wages, better benefits, better working conditions. So absolutely fucking love to see it. Congratulations to the people of Illinois, assuming that this actually ends up successfully passing. And one more here that I got for you guys from More Perfect Union. They say that New Mexico has become the first state in the country to guarantee a constitutional right to universal pre-K. The ballot measure directs money from a sovereign wealth fund to universal preschool and childcare, and voters approved it 70 to 30%. So, I mean, again, the takeaway here is that, number one, if you look at the results of all of these ballot measures, I mean, I think back, the classic example from 2020 was you look at a state like Florida, right, which is now very solidly red. We just saw the election of Ron DeSantis and how he just completely blew the Democrat out of the water. It is a massively red state, a conservative state through and through, a state that Donald Trump won back in 2020 and 2016 as well. And you look at a state like that, and they had a ballot initiative back in the 2020 election where the raising of the minimum wage to $15 an hour within the state of Florida got more votes than either Joe Biden or Donald Trump, right? So in this massively conservative state, you have voters who are basically to the left of both parties, right? Because Joe Biden, I mean, he comes out, says that he supports a $15 minimum wage. We all saw that he completely folded. He didn't actually want to fight for it and get it enacted, and Kirsten Sinema did her cutesy little thumbs down. So the lesson here to be learned is that overwhelmingly, when it comes to, economic issues, when it comes to left-wing populist policy, the voters, the American people broadly, are significantly to the left of definitely Republicans and conservatives, but also Democrats on many fronts. And that's, something that I've realized here is that this is completely fucking pathetic, right? Because we're sitting in a situation where a state like Missouri is legalizing marijuana, right? Where all of these conservative states are passing things like, universal health care and making themselves right to work, or banning right to work within their states, and, raising the minimum wage to $15, $12 an hour, whatever the fuck, and, pushing for universal health care. All of these different very progressive policies, which even somebody like Joe Biden has said are either unrealistic or they're not worth fighting for, or whatever the case may be. And you're basically left with a situation where some of the most conservative states in the entire country are outflanking the Democratic Party over the last couple of years as they've had control of the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. They are outflanking Democrats from the left. So again, I mean, the same lesson here is the same lesson that could have been learned from the electing of somebody like John Fetterman, right? Or Summer Lee in Pennsylvania as well. The reality here is that even if it is a swing state, even if it is a state that was completely dominated by Donald Trump, they're voting for those candidates, right? They're not voting directly on policy. And so you shouldn't look at some of the elections, right? Another great example of this was during the negotiations surrounding Build Back Better, the initial $3.5 trillion version. And the narrative coming out of the media, the narrative coming out of even many Democrats was, as Joe Manchin, this conservative millionaire coal baron from West Virginia, was tearing up Build Back Better into a million pieces and throwing it in the shredder. The narrative was like, okay, well, he's Joe Manchin. He comes from a state where Donald Trump overwhelmingly won, and it's just a conservative state. What are you going to do? He has to represent his voters' interests, his constituency, right? But then if you contrast that to what the actual polling data coming out of West Virginia at the time was showing, it's a completely different picture, right? The case wasn't that Joe Manchin is from a conservative state, so he has to represent, the anti, Build Back Better policies or anything like that. If you looked at the polling data, Democrats, independents, and in many polls, even Republicans supported the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better bill for passing overwhelmingly across the board. It was like upwards of over 60% of people in West Virginia, a very conservative state, as we typically think about it, they wanted this big, scary socialist spending agenda item, right? So, I mean, you have to take the lesson here that voters are overwhelmingly left-wing and populist when it comes to economic policy, when it comes to, military policy in the military budget and things like that, but especially when it comes to just basic fundamental economic reforms that are being pushed by the left, that are being pushed by politicians like Bernie Sanders and, the rest of the squad and all of that. They're portrayed as if they're these radical, crazy policies, but I mean, when you see people have the opportunity, which this is something we should have much more of, we should be doing this every single election cycle at the national level, not just within individual states, we should get to vote on this directly because, again, at the end of the day, it's not perfect. We saw some of the conservative states who went the wrong direction on some of these ballot initiatives, but broadly, the American people, if you gave us the opportunity to vote directly on Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, free public college, student debt forgiveness, marijuana legalization, the legalization of psychedelics, across the board, all of these major policies that are left-wing and populist in nature, they would pass, right? So it's not perfect. You don't need to vote on literally everything at the national level in a pure democracy sense. But at the end of the day, we are actually doing well. And at the end of the day, Democrats have to recognize that, if you put these things on the table, if you actually go out and you fight for these things that are overwhelmingly popular across the board, Democrat, Independent, Republican, you will do better electorally. You will win a lot more of these elections, and people will actually recognize that you're fighting for things that they overwhelmingly support and that are materially improving their lives.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying